Okay, we now have a kick, snare, overheads, and now it's time for the toms. And right now we're still a little rough, but when the kick and snare are rocking, and the overheads didn't suck to begin with, or they've been high passed or whatever, the whole thing starts to take shape, and it starts to sound a little bit like a drum set again, and maybe an overproduced one. But what's wrong with that? I'm cool with it. And we do, by the way, and Slate does have some really raw samples too. If you really wanted to go a lot more raw, natural, whatever, less modern, less fancy, more old school, whatever you want to call it, those options do exist as well. I don't use them because I don't care. I like this. Okay, so let's start looking at toms. Now, toms is something I don't normally like to replace unless the drummer has actually used a little bit of musical taste in his playing. And our drummer here is not the greatest drummer in the world, but one thing he did right was he used toms that actually add to the song. That's rare in local music land, in my experience. People hit toms because it's fun to hit round things. I really do get pissed about that because every instrument, every note you hit should have a reason for it, in my opinion. And anything extraneous is just that. Okay, so I want to show you first. Let's go ahead and do some restoration on these old toms and see what we can do with them. And the toms are about as rough as the rest of the kit. And it's so weird how one week you get the drummer of the century in who has a kit tuned, amazingly, and then the next week you get somebody who's different, and it's amazing how the results vary. It really reminds you how little you have to do with this gig, how unimportant us engineer guys are, unless we're doing this. Okay, so let's try to save these toms the old-fashioned way. Part of my malfunction was I didn't have a tom bottom on, I guess it's tom 1, actually. I thought it was tom 2. It's labeled wrong. So we have tom 1 top, tom 2 top, and then tom 2 bottom. So we're going to make that work. The bottom I always keep center pan because there's a lot of low-end energy in there, and who cares? And then the top one, let's see, tom 1 we have pan 50% to the right, and the other one 45 to the left. Okay, so what I've got these done is I've bussed them to a tom bus, and that allows me to EQ them all collectively. And I always start out this way. We can go in and tweak individually if we find it necessary, but I never like doing that, just because it wastes so much time, especially when you've got a guy with 4 toms and so 8 tom tracks. It's just not productive, and I can solve 85, 90, sometimes 100% of my problems with just one equalizer, which is faster and better and whatever. Okay, so let's check this thing out. The first thing I always do whenever I'm resurrecting toms is I turn them up way too damn loud. It's important for me to hear them punching out, and the last thing I want to do is mix on some kind of sissy level where the toms are down by 20 decibels, because no one wants to hear that. Everybody wants their toms to be clear. So let's start out with just playing this little loop, and this is probably going to get boring as hell for you guys. I apologize. No, I don't. Tough crap. Welcome to my world. Our fancy triggered slate ones are in there, making it sound better than it actually is. Okay, and first off, let's see. I'll just use the meters. Well, I bought it that way. That's probably good enough. Oh, listen to that. Tone, tone, tone. Tony has done it again. All right, so again, I want to hear all the drums in context, and that includes our samples and all that business. And now we are going to crank up these toms pretty freaking loud, and I like to do that with the Cambridge output level. So all right, that's really, really nice. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to try to knock off all the low end I don't need. And I'm using a pretty steep filter. It's debatable what toms, need, but I don't like anything below 60 or something like that, but we'll see. And one thing that's really cool is with that snare hitting right behind that tom, it really adds to the ambience of the toms themselves. It appears as if the toms are more powerful, when really it's just that slight ambience off the snare that's really saving us. All right, so we're going to do the sweep technique and find the junk frequencies. I probably actually should find some toms where the snare is not doing much. What's this spot do? Okay, and we're definitely getting some compression right now, but that's just because we haven't notched out our toms. We'll get that covered here in a little bit. Okay, so we got a mess in like the 500 to, well, anything under, between 150 and 500, it sounds like. Well, let's play around. All right, what I'm doing there, I'm looking for the spot that sucks the most. Granted, I'm boosting by close to 20 decibels, so you boost by 20 decibels, everything's going to suck. And so that's something to factor in there. But when I find the spot that hurts the most, that I hate, I leave it there and then I pull it down. So that ended up being 236 hertz. Oh, my old arch nemesis. Me and him go way back. All right, let's play how. And you can hear we got a rattle. Almost sounds like a cell phone ringing in the speakers. But it's just this damn drum set falling apart. For that kind of stuff, I'm not going to take this whole resurrection thing too far. A guy with a rattly drum set, that's just a part of his personality, and we're leaving it in there. That, and I don't know how to solve it and don't really want to do that much work. All right, let's see how we do in context here. Okay, and we still got a lot of that crappy, ringy, I don't know if it's 200 or 100 or 500 or what, but something in the sustain of the toms I really hate. And so, once again, take a while, guess what we're going to do? We have excessive sustain, so we are going to use our, well, hang on. I was trying to find it and sound like Sean Connery at the same time. We're going to use our Transient Designer a bit. All right, and this is something I've already played with a little bit on the real mix. And nothing too crazy, just a little bit of sustain reduction, a little bit of attack increase. And let's see what that does. Got to be really careful because too much attack on these toms will overload compressors, which we kind of heard a minute ago. Whoa, I'm dying. All right, here we go. And it really gets into a tricky debate with the toms. For me, I really want them heard, and I want no frequencies to be bad in them. Now, at the moment, they're a little thin. They don't have much 100 hertz in there, so we can add that. But I guess it really becomes down to the individual. If you really want to spend 1,000,000 years on your toms, I kind of come from the school again of what is this thing doing musically, and in this case, it's not like, I don't know. I'm thinking of Skid Row, Youth Gone Wild. There's a bridge where it's like boom, 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 and it's this kind of power chant kind of vibe off the toms. They're real tribal and epic sounding. And in that particular case, the toms are so powerful that we really do need something that they need to sound like the apocalypse. In this case, I mean, are we looking for the apocalypse right here? Let's take a listen. I mean, we definitely want some more oomph, but as a whole, I'm not hearing the effect. And so, in other words, what I'm saying is let's get these toms nice and clear where we can hear what they're doing and make sure they're not ringing too crappy. I'm going to tame the ringing down, and we're going to crank up the low end. And I'm not going to overthink it too much. And part of that is because the drummer clearly didn't in terms of the kit he brought in. And if he really, really wanted some ridiculous whatever sound, he would have brought in an 808, or he would have done something, he would have tuned his drums in a way that was conducive to that. And of course, a lot of that is miscommunication. I probably need to find out more what this drummer had in mind tom-wise, but good luck talking to drummers about engineering. It's always a losing battle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fire up Alloy. Where are you at, Alloy? And I want to EQ post Transient Designer. That's a big deal because, where are you at? Let me do one thing at a time here. Because we've already reduced some of that sustain, the last thing I want to do is add more just to make the Transient Designer work harder. We've got the sound thinned out from a transient, or the sustain has been reduced. So now it's in our interest to go ahead and EQ post sustain reduction. Yeah, I'm using a bunch of new words. My brain had to adjust. Okay, so we're going to go to multiband first, and let's just see if we can just, I'm going to take a wild guess and say 120 to, well, 1K really. There's no need for anything sustaining there. So we'll pull the sustain down that much and see what happens. Okay, we can hear them, and they're clear. That's a good sign. Now I'm going to go ahead and add a little more attack up here on the third band, just because I want a little more stick clicky. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to reduce the sustain down, everything under 120. Again, fairly subtle, nothing too crazy here. Just gently shaping it. Okay, now let's add some low-end balls to this thing. Okay, and I'm boosting heavily, and it's not doing much. So that means I'm going to cut a little bit in that low mid, and that'll give the illusion of more high end and more bottom end. So let's find it. And let's just double check to make sure we don't have any filtering on. You never know with me. I might have put some kind of high pass junk on. Oh, nope. These are just not that thick of toms, which that's okay too. It's so easy to get into the mindset that we want monstrous toms all the time. And then in the practicality of a real like punk rock type mix, this isn't really a faster song. They have others that are. But they're looking for this tighter drum sound, and so that's probably reflective of why we have the sounds we do, is because they fit the song. Okay, let's put some guitars in here. So this is actually fun. We've avoided that up to this point, but now that we kind of have to figure out our cut-through business, could make a huge impact on what's going on in the whole grand scheme of things here. So we're checking out toms. Let's see what we got. All right, let's hear what this tom fill does. Okay, they're a little mid-rangey, a little bit more than I had in mind. So let's go ahead and tame that, and EQ is probably the best approach there. We'll loop this over, and you can see with the toms, there's nothing really fancy going on. A little bit of Transient Designer and a little bit of EQ, and that's really it. All on one bus, so I don't have to think about it a whole lot. And that generally, again, these aren't going to be world-class toms. And here's the thing, though, is the lack of ambience. We got that 3D thing on the snare. The kick has it to a certain degree, and I could probably add a little bit of room, 3D type room to it, too, if I wanted, and that's not out of the question yet. We'll get to that a little bit later, but I planned on doing a realism video a little later when we got all the close mics finished, but we saw how realismed our snare got right off the bat just with the sample. So we kind of have to match that just a little bit, which is a good standard actually, but keep on playing here. Good. Oxford. This is that UED. I want to take this down to 500 hertz, this EQ right here, and it won't let me because it's adhering to its analog counterpart. It's a digital EQ, for Christ's sake. Anyway, unbelievable that they limit you so much. This is why I like alloy isotope so much. I don't know why I'm not using. In fact, screw this thing. Why am I even using this? Oops. Well, I'm using it because I need it, but I'm mad now, so I'm going to switch to the alloy EQ just so they won't screw me. All right, here we go. Or what I heard was I got a lot of the mud out, but I was hearing a lot of that around 1K. Between 800 or so and 1K, there's a whole lot of kind of reminds me of tom sounds from 82 or so, which isn't a terrible thing, but I'm looking for something a little more scooped and a little bit more stick clicky. So we're going to add a little bit of top end here in a minute too. We got to be careful with adding that stick clicky business though, because that's going to affect our cymbals and all that stuff. And we do have a lot of bleed most likely in these toms. Okay, I'm not going to overthink these too much. I don't want to cause the bleed to be bad because I kind of want that bleed in there, to be honest, because we're using samples. All we've got is high passed overheads, and so there's not a lot of cohesive glue, I guess, real bouncing around bleed, which can be a very good thing sometimes. So I want bleed in the toms if I can keep it, and we have other tools, to increase the attack of the toms, particularly with the transient designer stuff. But and that may be a smarter move actually than EQing it. Let's go that route real quick. All right, that's a little closer. It's not perfect either. And this is another one of those cases where we are playing around with a mic that or mics that are 1 inch from the source or so. And that's just a real fake thing to be injecting, real, cranking up in the mix. It should be accompanied with room mics and things of that sort. So after all this damn work, well, we'll make another video, I guess. Okay, so right now we've got a kind of a nice starting point where at least our toms aren't muddy. There's nothing sexy about them, but they will provide a utilitarian service. You can actually hear them now. Next video.